Sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought in courtrooms, offices, or even on the battlefield. Sometimes, they unfold in the quiet, tree-lined streets of suburban America, where the veneer of civility hides a simmering undercurrent of power struggles, petty grievances, and outright malice. This is the story of one such battle. A battle that began with a simple conversation at a mailbox and ended with the downfall of a tyrant. My name is Ethan Carter, and this is the story of how I took on Margaret Hayes, the self-proclaimed Queen of Willow Creek, and made her regret every single decision that led her to cross me. The morning that changed everything. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and the neighborhood of Willow Creek looked like something out of a postcard. I was walking to my mailbox, sipping my coffee, when I noticed my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker, standing by her fence. She was clutching a grocery bag to her chest, her hands trembling slightly. Something about her demeanor caught my attention. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitaker," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Worry, maybe even pity. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft but tinged with concern, "I didn't know you were moving." I frowned, tilting my head. "Moving? I'm not moving. Why would you think that?" She hesitated, glancing down at her phone. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through something. "Then why is your house listed for sale?" My stomach tightened. A cold chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the morning sun. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Whitaker turned her phone toward me, and my heart slammed against my ribs. There it was, my house, my home, fully listed on a real estate website. The listing included recent photos, a price, and a fake contact email. The pictures were so recent that they even showed the new patio chairs I had bought just last month. The fake listing claimed the house was a motivated seller's dream, with an urgent move-in deal available. But what really made my blood boil was the price. It was absurdly low, insultingly low, as if someone wanted to get rid of the house as quickly as possible. Almost like they wanted me out. Permanently. I looked up at Mrs. Whitaker, and for the first time, I noticed the sorrow in her eyes. She had always been the neighborhood's comforting presence, a grandmotherly figure who saw the good in everyone. But now, she looked at me with something I wasn't used to seeing, pity. "Oh, Ethan," she murmured, reaching out to place a frail hand on my forearm. "I thought maybe you were in trouble. That maybe you needed the money." I swallowed hard, my jaw clenching. "No, Mrs. Whitaker," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I didn't put my house up for sale. Someone else did." Her gasp was soft, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. If even Mrs. Whitaker, who always believed the best in people, thought I was being taken advantage of, then I knew this wasn't just a minor inconvenience. This was an attack. A deliberate, cruel attempt to uproot me from my own home. And there was only one person in Willow Creek petty and vindictive enough to do something like this. Margaret Hayes, the self-proclaimed Queen of the HOA. Margaret Hayes, the tyrant of Willow Creek. Margaret Hayes had been a thorn in my side ever since I moved into Willow Creek 2 years ago. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, and she ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist. Bogus fines, nonsense complaints, and constant nitpicking were her trademarks. She had called the city over the color of my shutters, harassed me about the height of my grass, and even tried to fine me for having a non-compliant mailbox. But this was a new level of insanity. Mrs. Whitaker's grip on my arm tightened. Do you think someone is trying to force you out?" I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. "I don't think, Mrs. Whitaker. I know." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That woman," she muttered, her usual warm demeanor cracking for the first time. I knew she had her claws in everything, but this is evil. I nodded, my pulse pounding. "She doesn't just want control, Mrs. Whitaker. She wants people to kneel, and the ones who don't, she gets rid of." Mrs. Whitaker looked around, as if making sure no one was listening. Then, in a low, almost conspiratorial whisper, she said, "What are you going to do?" I clenched my fists, the rage bubbling to the surface, replacing the initial shock. "I'm going to find out exactly how she pulled this off," I said, meeting Mrs. Whitaker's worried gaze. "And then, I'm going to make sure Margaret Hayes regrets every single decision that led her to this moment." For the first time since our conversation started, Mrs. Whitaker smiled, a small, knowing smile. Good, she said. It's about time someone stood up to that woman. Little did we know, this was only the beginning. The investigation begins. I wasted no time. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from pure, unfiltered rage. My home, my sanctuary, had been violated in a way I never imagined possible. Someone had crossed a line, and that someone was Margaret Hayes. My pulse thundered in my ears as I snapped screenshots of the fraudulent listing. Every detail, my house, my address, the absurdly low price, was there in black and white. I zoomed in, heart pounding, noting the fake contact email. It was anonymous, but something told me Margaret's fingerprints were all over this. Fingers flying, I fired off an email to the site support team. But an email wasn't enough. I needed this handled now. I needed a human voice to hear just how serious this was. I dialed the department's number, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Ring, ring. Thank you for calling our fraud department. This is Amanda speaking. How can I assist you today? Her voice was polite, almost too polite. She had no idea the storm she was about to step into. I need to report a fraudulent listing, I said, my voice sharp and controlled. My house has been put up for sale without my permission. There was a brief pause. I imagined her scanning through a list of scripted responses, trying to decide which one fit. I'm so sorry to hear that, sir. I completely understand how concerning this must be. Do you have proof of ownership? Proof of ownership? Oh, I had proof. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. I can do you one better, I said, letting the weight of my next words sink in. I'm a real estate lawyer. Silence. Then, a subtle shift in her tone. Oh, well, that certainly simplifies things. Damn right it does. Here's what's going to happen. I continued, my voice calm but edged with steel. I'm sending you proof of ownership right now. I have legal documents, tax records, and title deeds. You're going to escalate this to the highest authority you have, and then you're going to tell me exactly how this listing got posted in the first place. Amanda cleared her throat. Understood, sir. Please send the documents to our fraud verification email. I'll personally ensure this gets reviewed immediately. I was already forwarding the documents before she finished speaking. Done, I said. Check your inbox. I heard her typing, then a soft intake of breath. Got it. Give me just a moment to review this. The silence stretched between us. My heartbeat felt like a drum pounding in my chest. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke. This listing is absolutely unauthorized. I'm escalating this to my supervisor now. It should be removed within the hour. An hour? That wasn't fast enough. Listen, Amanda, I said, my voice lowering. This is more than just fraud. This is someone trying to manipulate the sale of my home, my actual, lived-in home, while I'm still in it. You do realize how insane that is, right? I do, she said quickly. And I promise, we take these matters extremely seriously. I hope so, I murmured. Because I'm not stopping here. Whoever did this is going to pay. I could hear the nervousness in her reply. I understand, sir. And for what it's worth, I really hope you get justice for this. This is beyond anything I've seen before. Justice? Oh, Margaret Hayes had no idea what was coming her way. The fall of Margaret Hayes. Within the hour, as promised, the fraudulent listing vanished. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I stared at the screen, my fingers tapping against the desk. Removing the listing was one thing. Making sure Margaret suffered the consequences? That was another. My fury hadn't dimmed. If anything, it burned hotter. Because Margaret had made a mistake. She had underestimated me. And that was something I was about to make her regret. That evening, I did some digging. My hands trembled with barely contained rage as I scrolled through the digital footprints left behind by whoever had tried to sell my house. The fake email was registered to a burner account, but after some relentless searching, I found a trail leading back to someone chillingly familiar, Margaret's husband. Sloppy. Really sloppy. I clenched my jaw, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My home, my sanctuary, had been put up for sale by someone who thought they could control me. I had faced challenges before, but this was war. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with what I would do next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret's smug face, her self-satisfied smirk as she plotted ways to make my life miserable. Well, she was about to learn exactly who she was messing with. The next morning, I didn't just walk past Margaret's house. I marched. Each step was deliberate, filled with the kind of controlled fury that only someone who has been pushed too far can understand. And there she was, as expected. Margaret was outside, pruning her already perfect bushes like she was the queen of a kingdom she had created from sheer arrogance. She held her shears with a kind of self-importance, snipping away at anything that dared to grow beyond her control. She saw me before I even spoke, and there it was, the smirk. That insufferable, condescending smirk that told me she already thought she had won. "Good morning," she said, her voice sickly sweet, layered with the fake kindness of someone who enjoyed watching others suffer. "I heard you might be moving." My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced a calm smile onto my face. "Oh, you heard that, did you?" She gave an exaggerated shrug, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Word travels fast." I let the silence stretch between us, let the weight of my presence sink into her perfectly curated reality. Her smirk didn't falter at first, but I saw it, the briefest twitch in her jaw, the smallest flicker of discomfort in her gaze. "Funny," I finally said, my voice low and measured. "Because I just had a fraudulent listing taken down. Any idea how that happened?" Margaret didn't blink. If anything, her smug expression deepened. "Well," she said smoothly, shifting her weight and tilting her chin just slightly upward, "if someone listed your house, maybe it's a sign you should consider selling. This neighborhood has expectations, you know." I let out a slow, humorless chuckle, shaking my head. "Margaret, do you know what happens when you commit real estate fraud?" She blinked, feigning innocence. "Excuse me." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Her grip on her shears tightened, but she held her ground, her entitled confidence keeping her from seeing just how badly she had screwed up. "Because I do," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "And I'd be happy to educate you on the legal ramifications." Margaret scoffed, her expression twisting into one of outright contempt. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. You act like you're some kind of victim. Maybe if you followed the rules like everyone else, none of this would be happening." My blood turned to ice. "The rules?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "You mean the ones you make up as you go? The ones you use to control and bully people into submission?" Margaret rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, don't flatter yourself. This neighborhood deserves better than, well, people like you." The weight of her words hit me like a freight train, but I refused to show it. She wanted me to react, to get angry, to lose control. Instead, I let out a slow breath and smiled. "Oh, don't worry," I said, my tone chillingly light. "I'll be taking this exactly where it needs to go." And for the first time, real fear flashed across Margaret's face. The legal takedown. I spent the night compiling every single piece of evidence I had. The fraudulent real estate listing, the fake email, the messages I exchanged with the site's fraud team. My hands trembled as I organized each screenshot, each damning detail, making sure there were no loose ends. My mind raced with a cocktail of emotions: anger, disbelief, but most of all, determination. Margaret Hayes had messed with the wrong person, and now she was about to face the full weight of the law. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, my laptop screen was still glowing, my eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. I had triple-checked every document before sending it all to Beckett Oliver, my old friend from Columbia University Law School. Beckett wasn't just any attorney. He was a criminal law expert. If anyone could turn this into an ironclad case, it was him. Minutes after hitting send, my phone buzzed. Beckett's name lit up the screen. "You've got a rock-solid case," he said, his voice calm but laced with a hint of excitement. "She's screwed." I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. "Tell me you can bury her. Tell me this is going to stick." Beckett chuckled, but it wasn't his usual light-hearted laugh. It was the kind of laugh that signaled a predator spotting weak prey. "Oh, it'll stick. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. Real estate fraud isn't something a petty HOA tyrant like her can wiggle out of. She committed an actual crime." I gritted my teeth. "Good. Because I don't want her just embarrassed. I want her held accountable. I want her to feel every ounce of humiliation she tried to put me through." Beckett let out a slow whistle. "You really want blood, huh?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stared out my window at the quiet neighborhood that Margaret had poisoned with her power-hungry games. She put my home up for sale, Beck. My home. She wanted to uproot my life just to prove a point. If she could do this to me, she could do it to anyone. Beckett's tone shifted, turning serious. I get it. And you're right. But we need to be smart about this. The law is on your side, but we can't get cocky. She's going to fight like hell to get out of this. Let her. I spat. I want her to fight. Because the harder she fights, the harder she falls. Beckett sighed. Then, I heard the sound of paper shuffling on his end. I'll start filing today. This is going to be a full-scale legal takedown. She won't know what hit her. A dark satisfaction curled in my chest. Perfect. Keep me updated. The call ended, but my adrenaline was still surging. My hands clenched into fists as I thought about Margaret's smug face, the way she always looked at me like she was untouchable. But not anymore. The downfall. As I sat on my porch, sipping a stale cup of coffee the next afternoon, my breath hitched when a sleek black SUV rolled into the neighborhood. The moment I spotted the government plates, my pulse spiked. This was it. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their movements crisp and professional. My stomach twisted with a mixture of anticipation and satisfaction. I watched as they walked up Margaret's pristine driveway and knocked on her door. For the first time in her reign of terror, Margaret Hayes was about to feel what it was like to be powerless. A minute passed, then another, and then the door opened, and there she was. Her smug demeanor was gone, replaced by wide-eyed confusion. Mrs. Hayes, one of the agents asked, flashing a badge. We're here in connection with an alleged fraudulent real estate listing. We need to ask you some questions. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw her face pale. She knew. She knew exactly why they were there. And she knew exactly who had put them on her doorstep. Margaret's world was crumbling, and she knew it. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her usual arrogance nowhere to be found. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the edge of the doorway, her knuckles white from the grip. The investigator remained unfazed. He held up a thick file, his expression calm but firm. We have evidence linking the fraudulent listing to an account registered under your husband's name. We need to ask you some questions. Margaret's breath hitched. The color drained from her face as she darted a look over her shoulder, as if searching for an escape route. She opened her mouth to protest, but the female investigator beside him stepped forward, her voice like steel. We can escalate this to a warrant if necessary. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that even the birds seemed to respect. Margaret froze. Her usual bravado had abandoned her, replaced by the sinking realization that this wasn't another petty HOA squabble. This was real. This was serious. She swallowed hard. Fine, but I need to call my lawyer. I stood across the street, watching as the scene unfolded, my arms crossed over my chest. I couldn't stop the smirk that tugged at my lips. She should have called a lawyer before committing fraud. As the officers guided her toward the car, her head hung low in a way I had never seen before. The once feared tyrant of the neighborhood, the queen of fines and HOA power trips, was now nothing more than a defeated, desperate woman caught in her own web of deceit. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Doors cracked open, and curious eyes peeked out from behind curtains. The same people she had bullied for years were now watching her downfall with quiet satisfaction. Some murmured, some gasped, and others. They smiled. The aftermath. Margaret's resignation letter came a week later. Personal matters, she claimed, but we all knew the truth. The legal noose was tightening, and the court case was just beginning to unfold. The courtroom was cold, clinical, and unforgiving. Margaret sat at the defendant's table, her once pristine blazer wrinkled, her eyes hollow. She looked nothing like the woman who used to strut around the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a dictator. She looked small. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid it all out, the fake real estate listing, the burner email, and the undeniable digital trail leading back to her husband's account. The judge's gaze was heavy as he read through the evidence. Mrs. Hayes, he said, his voice stern. Do you understand the severity of the charges against you? Fraudulent real estate listings carry serious legal consequences. Margaret's voice cracked. I didn't mean to get caught. The prosecutor interrupted, his tone razor-sharp. Because based on the evidence, this was a deliberate, calculated attempt to force a homeowner out. You used deception, coercion, and fraud. And for what? Control over a neighborhood you don't even own. Margaret's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, knowing full well there was no solid defense. The courtroom held its breath. Then came the testimonies. Homeowners who had suffered under her reign of terror. One woman, a widow with tears in her eyes, recounted how Margaret had slapped her with over $300 in fines for improper landscaping when all she had done was plant a rose bush in honor of her late husband. And then my turn. I stood, calm but firm, and recounted every step. The fraudulent listing, the discovery of the fake email, the moment I stood across from her, watching her smirk as she tried to convince me my house being listed was just a sign. She didn't just overstep, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. She tried to steal my home. And if I hadn't fought back, she might have gotten away with it. Margaret wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge took a long breath before delivering the verdict. Mrs. Hayes, you have shown a blatant disregard for the law, for your community, and for the basic principles of decency. You abused your position, you manipulated homeowners, and you engaged in outright fraud. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at her. The court finds you guilty. A single sob escaped Margaret's lips as the reality hit her like a freight train. The courtroom buzzed with hushed voices, but all I could hear was the sound of justice being served. The sentencing followed, a hefty fine, restitution to affected homeowners, and a permanent ban from holding any leadership position in a homeowners association. As I walked out of the courthouse, the fresh air felt different. Lighter. Free. A week later, the moving trucks arrived. Margaret, the woman who tried to control everything, had lost everything. And as her car disappeared down the road, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, and raised my mug in a silent toast. Goodbye, Margaret. Epilogue. The neighborhood of Willow Creek slowly returned to normal. The oppressive shadow of Margaret Hayes was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of community. Mrs. Whitaker's garden bloomed brighter than ever, and the widow with the rose bush planted a new one, this time without fear of fines. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the quiet streets of suburban America hide the fiercest battles. And sometimes, justice isn't just for the courtroom, it's for everyone. If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, drop your story in the comments. And if you love seeing entitled people get what they deserve, don't forget to subscribe. Because trust me, you're going to love what's coming next. Justice isn't just for the courtroom. It's for everyone. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.